Hello and welcome to this class 9 in Maya 3.12. And in the previous class we finished up by creating all of the lighting resources that we need for our action shot here. Now in this class we're going to start applying those to the scene. The only difference between this scene and the one from the previous class is that the ground plane no longer has subdivisions, so it's going to make it a bit easier for our projections. And also I've gone ahead and put in a couple of 3D projection nodes, but we'll talk about those in just a second. Let's go ahead and start projecting some of our LDR JPEGs onto our geometry, and then we'll replace those with the high resolution EXRs. They're going to give us that nice level of interaction. So I'm going to select all of our environment geo, right click, and I'm going to assign a new material. For projections like this, I like to use just a basic surface shader. And then in the out color, I'm going to create File, Create as Projection, come up to the file, and I'm going to find the origin 1 proxy JPEG, and let's open that up. Now this is a proxy lat long, and I'm going to switch our color space for this because it's a JPEG over to sRGB. And let's show the textures in the viewport. I'm also going to hide our truck just for now. And it looks like we've got a lot of stripes here, and that's just because our projection type is incorrect. So let's head over to our projection, which is right here underneath projection 3. At the moment it's set to planar, and we don't want it to be planar. We don't even want it to be perspective because we're not projecting through a camera here. We actually want this to be spherical because we're projecting a lat long proxy JPEG of our HDRI, which is actually an LDR, which is a low dynamic range image. Okay, so it looks like it's smeared across the whole of our ground plane, and that's just because our place 3D texture node is in the wrong place. All that we have to do is raise it up, and we can see that from the text on the ground plane here, where it says wait here, this is actually inverted. So this place 3D texture selected, let's go back to our projection, dive into the image, go over to the place 2D texture node, and underneath repeat UV, let's switch the U to -1. That way our text is now the correct way round. Okay, great. So all we have to do now is find the correct orientation and position for our LDR. And because we're using a JPEG, we can use this inside the viewport really easily. It's nice and lightweight. To change the relative scale of this, you just move it up and down to try and find a good fit. So we've got the pillars in here that are going to help us out. We can try and get those aligned. We can also move the pivot point of our projection to any one of the pillars to help us scale from there. Now this isn't affecting the scale of our projection necessarily, it's just moving our projection node up and down. So this can take a while just to get it aligned, so what I've done is I've gone ahead and I've actually already aligned the projection for this node. So I'm going to select our geo, I'm going to assign the default Lambert to that, and I'm going to remove that 3D node. I'm going to unhide this origin 1 projection node, select all of our geometry, right click, assign origin 1 projection. Okay, so we can see that this is nicely orientated to our scene, and the bases of the pillars are in the right place and they are roughly the right height. I've also gone ahead and done this for the origin 2. So if I select all of our geometry, right click, come down and assign the origin 2 projection shader, and then unhide that projection, you can see that we have two positions, one over here and one over here. And the reason why we have two projections is we can use one projection over here to get a good resolution and a good angle on this particular area. And then on this area back here, we can use a separate projection to get a good line up there as well. Now all that we have to do is combine these two shaders. So let's head up to the hypershade. So with our hypershade open, I'm going to select our two origin surface shaders. They're right up here in the top left. Graph both of these. And we can see that all we have in here is exactly the same as how we set it up for that little example at the start of the class. We have a projection. And going into it, we have our proxy JPEG for origin 2. And we have a projection down here, and we have our proxy JPEG for origin 1. And then we have two surface shaders, and they're plugged into separate surface shader shading groups. I'm going to drop down a new surface shader, And I'm going to call this projection shader. And just to keep it tidy, I'm actually going to rename the shading group as well. Okay, great. So I'm going to move these two surface shaders out of the way. And I'm going to drop down a layered texture. And the out color of the layered texture, I'm going to put into our projection shader. And then into our layered texture, I'm going to take the projection, middle click and drag onto the color. And then I'm going to click in the blank space over here on the screen right. And repeat for origin 1. So now we have both of our projections inside of a layered shader. And for our projection 1, I'm going to change the blend mode to over. I'm actually going to go ahead and delete the original projections, just to keep it tidy. I'm going to select our layered texture and let's go over to the scene. So now we don't have anything assigned to this geometry. Let's just right click, assign existing material and find projection shader. So if we click on the geometry now, we can see that we have the projection shader over here. If we follow through the color, come in and find that layered shader. By turning the alpha up and down, we can switch back and forth between the two projections. And we can see that we have more resolution near the origin of each one. So now all we need to do is blend between them. So in alpha, I'm just going to click and create a ramp. So coming down to ramp, right click, and I'm going to create this as a projection as well. Now we have another place 3D texture node inside of our scene. And this we do want to be planar. So let's come and find that, and we're going to actually drag this up. And we can see the direction of the projection here. And we're going to rotate this round so it's pointing directly down at our scene. So that's a negative 90 degrees in X. I'm now going to scale this up. So let's go and find our layered texture once again. Hit select, come over to the hypershade, and let's follow this back down and find our ramp, which is right here. And we want to change to using the red channel of our ramp into the alpha input of our layered texture. Okay, so let's head along and find that ramp, which is right here inside of our attribute editor. Now when we slide this around, you can see it's having a profound effect on our projection. We want to switch this over to a U ramp. Let's come in and take a look. Now by selecting that place 3D texture node, we can move it around and adjust the position. So let's come back to our hypershade. Let's find our ramp, which is right here. And underneath place 2D texture, let's turn off wrap on the U and wrap on the V. In the ramp itself, if we scroll down and find color balance, let's change the default color to black. Inside of our projection for the ramp, let's change our default color as well, down to black. Then the projections for our LDR JPEGs, bring these down to black. Okay, great. Let's go back and take a look at our scene. So now when we move this over, we can see that we're masking areas of our spherical projections. So let's start to manipulate the ramp. Let's take another black swatch and put this over here on the screen right. And let's move our ramp over closer to origin 2, which is right down here at the front. Let's stretch this out a little bit just so it's reaching the edge of our projection. We can also make this a little bit larger. Okay, so let's go ahead and hide that. Now that you can see, instead of having a low resolution here and a high resolution here, or a low resolution here and a high resolution over here, we can use the ramp to mask one spherical projection from the other vertically, so it's cutting right the way through the middle of our scene. So we should have a decent level of resolution between the two. We're essentially creating a pop-up book of textures for us to reflect into the side of our car. Now let's head back to the hypershade. Now where we have the JPEGs for our spherical projections, Let's swap these out for the cleaned up EXRs. Come in and find the clean EXR for position 1, and then come down to our origin 2, and let's find the cleaned up EXR for position 2. So now when we go back to our scene, we can see that we have plenty of texture resolution all the way along the floor. And because we're using that mask, the resolution doesn't fall off in the important areas. So when our car drives along, we'll be picking up some nice level of interaction from the floor with a good level of resolution in there as well. Let's go ahead and we can adjust some of our geometry to help out. So I'm going to move this edge back until we reach somewhere near the back wall. And that's going to give us a nice bit of coverage for where the car drives past. And let's move out this back edge as well, just so we're reaching the back wall more nicely. Then behind the camera we can add a little bit more. This is obviously going to stretch a little bit. And we can always pull this side out too for a little bit of greater coverage. Mainly, the area that we're interested in is this central road area. I'm going to grab these two sides, come over to the modeling tools, and I'm going to extrude these and move them up until we reach the edge of the roof. Something around about there will be okay. Now I'm going to grab what we've just created, go to Edit and Duplicate, move this way up. I'm going to select these two back faces and delete those. Using D and V on the keyboard, I'm going to snap our pivot to the back corner and move this down into position. Okay, so we can see that we've got the inverse projection of the roof on our duplicated piece of geometry here. So let's call this roof underscore geo. Let's come around and take a look at what we've got here. So we can see that in here we've got areas where our lights will have originally been, and we will eventually replace those with area lights. But in the meantime, we need to add in an additional piece of geometry for this side down here. And we can do that with a simple extrusion from our ground. So I'm going to select this edge, extrude this up. I'm going to move the pivot point over to the end and snap that to the roof. Okay, so we've essentially created a projected pop-up book of our underground car park. So areas where there's light outside, we want to cut these away. I'm just going to cut away this section. Okay, so that way we'll be able to see out a little bit more clearly and we'll get a better level of interaction on our car. And let's create a bit more of a cutaway here at the back as well. So again, I'm going to use the modeling tools and the multi-cut to just cut away a section at the back that's going to give us a little bit more of an interaction from an external light. Okay, now I'm just going to cut away these two walls. Let's remove a section of the roof as well, because this is actually a ramp coming into the car park. Okay, so this is going to allow us to have some light spilling in from each side. Okay, so now I'm going to grab these two objects, switch over to Vertex, select by component, grab this end section, and I'm just going to give us a little bit more room back here. And now I'm going to create a polygon just to close up the hole at the back. So let's go to Create, Polygon Primitives, and I'm going to create a plane with a 1x1 division. I'm going to move that out here, scale it up. And I'm just going to grab the verts and seal up this hole. Okay, great. And we need to apply, again, the same projection shader. So I'm going to call this fill underscore geo. Place that right down here inside the geo group. And now you can see we've got a pop-up book of the inside of the car park. Now, depending on what your requirements are for your scene, you can be more or less accurate with the projection. And I think that this is going to work quite well for us. All we needed to do was to create a hole at the back to allow light from the outside of the building, and some of that over here as well. Depending on the requirements for your scene, you can do more or less geometry, spend more time aligning the HDRs to match up with it as well. But for our purposes, this is going to be okay. We can get a slightly better lineup on a few objects and do some baking now. So I'm going to come back here and find this edge. And I'm going to extrude this out, just to give us a bit more of a feel of that ramp. And the same from here as well. I'm going to add in a subdivision about halfway along. Grab our target weld. And I'm just going to weld these edges together. That way we have something that's a bit more closely representative of the ramp at the back there. We can also look at taking these edges here and extruding those up as well, just to give us a bit more of an occlusion on that ramp. Okay, so to get a better lineup on the roof, let's just grab that piece of roof geometry. And I'm just going to move it up until we get a slightly better alignment. Maybe grab this edge loop as well, move it over, and we can move this one as well. Okay, so hopefully we're getting a tighter alignment there. Let's go around to the perspective view. I'm going to grab our walls, select the edge loop, making sure that we have all of those selected. And we can translate this up. If I use D and V on the keyboard to shift our pivot, we can translate that up to meet the corner of the roof. So now when we go to our shot cam, we can see that we've got a slightly better alignment on our geometry. Okay, great. So now we've essentially created a pop-up book for the inside of our car park, and this is a really quick way to try and get some nice interactive textures running down our reflections. So if we take a look through our camera, switch off textured, have a look at our image plane, everything aligns and we've got some textures on this geometry now that are going to help give us some really nice reflections and interactions as the car drives through our scene. If we just use the HDRI as it was, when the car drives through the scene, we probably wouldn't get some really nice rolling highlights. So in the next class, we're going to take a look at actually adding the lights into our scene and rendering out the result.